Hello, this is Canna Talks with Dr. Ingrid. If you like our content, please click the like button and subscribe to our channel below. This video deals with a sensitive subject that gets many people's hackles up: cannabis and pregnancy. How does cannabis affect the developing brain? In other words, if a mother-to-be ingests cannabis in any form, how could this affect her baby? Please join me and let's look at the facts. Cannabis has become one of the most consumed recreational drugs during pregnancy, after tobacco and alcohol. It is estimated that anywhere from 3 to 16% of women use cannabis during pregnancy. Some studies suggest 28%, some even 35%. The true figure is likely even higher due to underreporting. As it is being legalized in many states as well as many countries around the world, the idea is being propagated that it is without health risks. This, however, is not consistent with the truth. People have waited for the legalization of cannabis for a very long time. This is true. However, looking the other way when it comes to potentially adverse effects is foolish and very dangerous, especially in pregnancy, where we are dealing with two people: one, the mother, who can make independent decisions, and the other, the growing embryo or fetus, who has no input into any decisions but might have to suffer serious consequences. At this time, we don't really know a whole lot about the full impact of maternal cannabis. We are literally only scratching the surface, but we are starting to see that there are problems. This should most definitely not be ignored. A study based on research conducted by the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai and the City University of New York, and published in November 2021 in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, looked at the effect of prenatal cannabis exposure on later childhood development. The study found that cannabis causes 1. Definite suppression of immune gene networks in the placenta, and 2. Increased anxiety in the offspring. So what does that mean, and how was this study actually done? Let's start with how the study was done. The participants were 322 mother-child pairs who were taken from an ongoing study in New York City that looked at stress in pregnancy, which started in 2009. After delivery, researchers took all placentas and examined them, specifically looking at gene sequences. They then followed these babies' development as they grew up until they were about 6 years old and obviously no longer babies. At that time, hormone levels were taken from the children's hair samples and EKGs were done to measure heart function during stressful situations. Also, the children's behavioral and emotional responses were recorded based on surveys given to the parents. All of this data was then tabulated and carefully looked at. Before we can explain what exactly the study findings mean, we need to understand how a fetus can even be affected by cannabis. For this, we have to look at the endocannabinoid system. What is this system and why is it called that? The endocannabinoid system was first discovered in the 1990s when researchers were starting to examine THC, which is a component of cannabis sativa. Since then, this has been the subject of intense research. Endocannabinoids are similar in structure to substances found in cannabis. Endo means inside, and simply stated, endocannabinoids come from inside of the human body and are substances that the body naturally produces. And as I said, these are structurally very similar to substances that come from the cannabis plant. Because of this structural similarity, cannabis can bind to receptors in the endocannabinoid system. This system regulates pretty much all major functions, including pain, memory, mood, immunity, stress. It is a key part of maintaining the body's integrity and balance, and is literally found everywhere: in the brain, heart, lungs, liver, muscles, bones, the immune system, and all other body systems that I did not specifically mention. Additionally, we know that cannabis is able to interact with other receptors in the body, especially serotonin and opioid receptors. So, when a pregnant woman ingests cannabis in any form, the developing baby does too. There is no question about this. Cannabis easily crosses the placental barrier, travels through the umbilical cord, and winds up inside the fetus within minutes, interacting with the fetal brain. There is a huge difference, however, between a mature body and an immature one that is in the process of developing. Let's look at the fetal brain. It begins to develop around the 3rd week of pregnancy, when the fetus is actually still an embryo. During the following month, it goes through a rapid succession of changes until at birth, the baby's brain is about a quarter of the size of an adult brain. It then doubles in size in the first year and keeps growing. At the age of 5, the brain is about 90% of the size of an adult brain. The brain contains a huge amount of endocannabinoid receptors, which are growing along with the developing brain. Introducing any kind of substance into this well-calibrated system brings it out of balance and can be devastating depending on the stage of fetal development. Pregnancy is often complicated by anxiety and stress, sometimes even under the best of circumstances. Pregnant women who ingest cannabis will often do so to reduce this anxiety and stress, and we know that the endocannabinoid system is good at that. However, and this cannot be overstated, the mother system is mature and has completed its development, unless the mother is still a teenager, but that is a discussion for a different video. As opposed to the mother, though, the fetus is changing from day to day and has to be able to do so on its own time. Development happens via a feedback system, and that has to be a balanced process. Any influence from the outside will throw the whole system off. Nature does not like being messed with. So let's say a pregnant woman has successfully reduced her stress by ingesting cannabis. She now feels better, but the Mount Sinai study shows that the effect on her child is opposite that. In other words, feeding a developing system cannabis will lead to an increase in stress, anxiety, aggression, and hyperactivity in the baby, compared to children who were not exposed to cannabis in utero. Let that sink in a minute. Remember the hair samples, EKGs, and parent surveys I mentioned earlier? The hair sample results clearly showed increased levels of the stress hormone cortisol. EKGs done on the children showed signs of increased stress sensitivity, and the surveys given to the parents supported all of this. But that is not all that came out of this study. Gene studies conducted on the placentas collected at birth showed that cannabis use was associated with lower genetic markers for immune-activating genes and substances called cytokines, which are a part of our defense against infection and which are very important for every human being. In other words, the fetus's immune system is negatively impacted by cannabis use, and as a result, the newborn will have an increased susceptibility to infection and a decreased ability to defend itself against them. The study size of the Mount Sinai study was relatively small, 322 mother-child pairs, as I mentioned earlier, and no doubt follow-up studies with larger numbers of participants are needed, which will hopefully happen soon. But it is not the only study raising concerns. Far from it. For example, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA, cautions that prenatal cannabis has been linked to fetal growth restriction and low birth weight, a greater risk of stillbirth and preterm birth, as well as long-term problems with brain development affecting memory, learning, and behavior. SAMHSA also points out that cannabis has been found in breast milk and might wind up in babies that way. Remember, the brain is still developing for quite some time after birth. Another study, published in Future Neurology in 2011 and coming from the Texas Children's Hospital, also found that, quote, prenatally cannabis-exposed children display cognitive deficits, suggesting that maternal consumption has interfered with the proper maturation of the brain, unquote. In this study, the researchers noted that confounding factors may play a role, such as dosage, concurrent polysubstance abuse, length and frequency of substance use, pregnancy stage, and also environmental factors, such as maternal nutrition and socioeconomic status. At this time, it has been difficult to isolate cannabis and look at it uncoupled from all other factors affecting prenatal development, but efforts are underway to do just that. A study published in Reproductive Health in February 2020 also raises questions about mental health effects in children exposed to cannabis in utero. This was a literature review, actually. It used PubMed databases until 2018 to look at the connection between prenatal cannabis use and the development of psychiatric disorders, and in fact, discovered a link to affective disorders and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder in the exposed offspring. Again, more studies are needed, but we should stay tuned for what we might learn in the future. In the meantime, the researchers cautioned that mental health providers who treat women during their fertile years need to have cannabis on their radar and must be aware of this possible link. Moving along, the journal Frontiers in Psychiatry published an article in January 2021 called Prenatal Cannabinoid Exposure: Emerging Evidence of Physiological and Neuropsychiatric Abnormalities, which confirmed the previously described issues. At the same time, it expressed serious concerns about the tendency of some pregnant women to continue to self-medicate with cannabis and ignore evidence that this could harm the fetus, even if it is presented directly to them. The false perception that cannabis is safe during pregnancy has actually increased threefold in recent years, especially in areas where cannabis is legalized and among women who report regular use prior to their pregnancy. In fact, survey and toxicology data derived from large healthcare databases show an increase by 170% from 2009 to 2016. There's also an age-dependent disparity. 3% of women aged 34 and older ingest cannabis during pregnancy, compared to 22% of women aged 18 to 24. These figures are derived from self-reporting, which seriously underestimates the problem. One study shows reported cannabis use at 2.6%, while confirmatory umbilical cord blood samples actually showed 22.4% cannabis use, a nearly 10-fold disparity. The problem is worsened by a lack of evidence-based policy and inconsistent messages by healthcare providers. In an online survey, at least one-half of all healthcare providers did not explicitly discourage prenatal cannabis use. Last but not least, an article published by the Mass General Hospital Center for Women's Mental Health raises a few more points regarding the effect of cannabis on the fetal brain, especially the effect of THC. Remember, cannabis crosses the placenta very quickly and enters the fetal circulation. It then easily passes the blood-brain barrier to the fetal brain, where it is found at its highest level. THC will then bind to the endocannabinoid receptors in the fetal brain, causing several huge problems. It interferes with fetal uptake of folate, which is needed to prevent neural tube defects and low birth weight. Many pregnant women would remember having to take folate supplements to prevent exactly these problems. Well, it does not help if folate cannot be utilized by the fetus. THC is also believed to interfere with critical pathways for cellular growth and the formation of new blood vessels, and it influences the differentiation of neural cells from stem cells, which can seriously affect learning and memory, as well as other aspects of development. Unfortunately, it will likely take quite a while for research to catch up with actual use of cannabis, especially as it becomes more accessible and acceptable. So, what is the take-home message then? It is simple. Do not use cannabis in pregnancy. In medicine, we always have to look at the risk-benefit ratio of any treatment. With our current knowledge about prenatal cannabis exposure, the potential risks of truly hurting children are much too great. Therefore, don't. Not in any form. This concludes our video, Cannabis and Pregnancy. Obviously, there are many more details I was unable to touch on, and I expect and hope that there will be tons more research in the not-too-distant future. As always, there's lots of information available on the internet, so educate yourself and continue to do so. Make sure to look at reputable sources only, because there's also a lot of nonsense out there. Let's look towards the future together and see what science can teach us as research of cannabis becomes more and more available. Because believing in science means to be open to discovery and to embrace facts, not mere wants. The description below contains a few interesting links which support this video. As before, please post questions or comments below. And don't forget to click like and subscribe to our channel. See you soon for more topics on Canna Talks with Dr. Ingrid. Ciao!